Burbank, California, 1944. The sky above Lockheed's Vega plant glowed like molten steel. Inside, the air vibrated with the roar of drills, rivet guns, and music blaring from loudspeakers. Floodlights pierced the haze of welding smoke as rows of P-38 Lightnings moved forward like silver phantoms on rails. Every 5 minutes, another fighter rolled off the line. 5 minutes. That's all it took for 15,000 workers to turn raw alloy into something that could conquer gravity, span oceans, and destroy at 20,000 feet. Across the nation, the rhythm echoed. In Kansas City, North American Aviation assembled Mustangs in endless lines longer than city blocks. In Seattle, Boeing's Plant 2 hid beneath a fake suburban neighborhood. Painted trees and paper houses designed to fool enemy bombers. Beneath it, the city of wings thrummed day and night. Women, immigrants, and farmhands labored shoulder to shoulder, measuring time not by the clock, but by the sound of engines being born. Outside, a billboard declared $2 billion for air power. But numbers meant little here. To those inside, every bolt, every rivet, every shudder of the floor was worth more than any dollar. They knew the arithmetic of war by instinct. Money couldn't fly. Machines could. What America created in 1944 wasn't just an air fleet. It was an industry that had made flight itself mechanical. From 1940 to 1945, U.S. production expanded from 3,000 planes a year to nearly 100,000. One bomber every hour, a fighter every few minutes. In a single year, the United States built more aircraft than Germany and Japan combined produced during the entire conflict. At its height, 1 in every 4 American workers served aviation, building engines, assembling wings, or crafting the thousands of small miracles that made air supremacy real. The result wasn't simply a statistic. It was a shift in civilization. The Axis treated technology as artistry. The United States treated it as rhythm. The rhythm of conveyors, the hum of rivets, the pulse of progress measured in serial numbers, the sound of wealth turning into motion. By the end of 1944, America had spent $2 billion transforming air into territory, manufacturing not just machines, but momentum itself. The 5-minute miracle wasn't about speed alone. It was about mastery, dominance measured in minutes. Because in modern warfare, whoever commands time commands the sky. Newspapers made it sound simple. America spent $2 billion and captured the heavens. But money by itself doesn't fly. If currency could win wars, the British Empire would still rule, and the Soviets would have collapsed before producing a single tank. The real wonder wasn't wealth. It was transformation. When Congress authorized the $2 billion aircraft budget in 1940, the United States scarcely had an air force. The Army Air Corps owned fewer than 3,000 aircraft. Most outdated, many grounded. Pilots trained in planes of canvas and wood. Engines leaked oil. Factories lacked aluminum, and military doctrine still thought in cavalry terms. The funding could have been squandered easily, but it wasn't, because America did something the Axis powers could not. It converted its entire economy into an air engine. Henry Kaiser, builder of Liberty ships, taught Boeing how to mass-produce bombers. General Hap Arnold, the architect of the U.S. Army Air Forces, didn't just request airplanes, he demanded a production system. The War Production Board ensured that every nut, bolt, and gallon of fuel had a purpose before a single plane rolled off the line. It wasn't spending, it was choreography. Factories that once produced cars were reborn overnight. Ford's Willow Run, Chrysler's Dodge plant, General Motors' Allison Engine Division. 1 month they built sedans. The next, they turned out B-24 Liberators by the thousands. No prototypes, no test runs, just instant acceleration. Money doesn't fly, Arnold reminded his team. But systems do. The Axis had brilliant engineers. America built brilliant processes. Germany crafted aircraft like art pieces, each handmade, each unique, each imperfect. Japan produced masterpieces in bamboo hangars. America created rhythm. $2 billion didn't buy airplanes. It bought a pattern, a method that could take an idea, translate it into metal, and replicate it 100,000 times. For every dollar spent, 10 hands moved in harmony. For every blueprint printed, a mile of conveyor adjusted itself. And that was the secret the world overlooked. The U.S. didn't outspend its foes. It outsynchronized them. Money was the spark. The machine was the miracle. Every dollar was a heartbeat. Every factory, a lung. Every rivet, a neuron firing in an industrial mind that learned faster than any general. By 1943, the War Department had stopped calling aircraft equipment and started labeling them inventory in motion. Planes were no longer things. They were flows of power, measured not in cost, but in continuity. $2 billion turned into momentum, and momentum, once born, became unstoppable. That's how money became air power, not through purchase, but through process. Because in America, the dollar was never the weapon. The system was. In 1940, American air power existed mostly on paper, a scattering of underfunded bases, small contractors, and engineers still learning to mass-produce wings. Within 4 years, it had become the largest, most integrated industrial organism in history. It began with the War Production Board, the nervous system of the arsenal of democracy. Its director, Donald Nelson, had one mission: to turn American capitalism into a single machine. No redundancy, no idleness, no hesitation. The blueprint started in 3 layers: metal, manpower, and movement. First came metal. The Pacific Northwest, with its hydroelectric dams, became the heart of aluminum production. Plants in Washington and Oregon produced enough lightweight alloy each month to build 10,000 aircraft. Engineers joke that the Columbia River runs with molten wings. Second was manpower. By 1943, over 2 million Americans worked directly in aviation production. Many were women. Thousands more were Black and Latino workers who entered factories for the first time. They weren't treated as labor. They were treated as a weapon class. Boeing engineers rewrote training manuals in plain English so far could assemble aircraft without an engineering degree. "Anyone can rivet," said Rosie the Riveter. "You just have to believe in what you're building." Third was movement, the art of getting everything everywhere. Rail cars moved fuselages. Trucks moved engines. Trains connected factories like veins in a living body. A wing made in Kansas might meet its engine from Connecticut and its pilot from Texas. All within a week. The United States wasn't just building planes. It was building velocity. Each manufacturer became a kingdom with its own genius. Boeing mastered the long-range bomber, the Flying Fortress, and later the B-29 Superfortress. North American aviation gave birth to the P-51 Mustang, a plane that turned the European air war upside down. Lockheed built the P-38 Lightning, the twin-boomed assassin that could dive faster than any German fighter. Behind them all was the Army Air Force's Material Command, an invisible empire of warehouses, test fields, and transport hubs. If a factory fell behind, parts were rerouted in hours. If a plant was bombed, production shifted overnight. The Germans couldn't understand it. To them, war was a matter of genius. Brilliant designs, superior craftsmanship. To the Americans, war was a matter of systems. The U.S. didn't chase perfection. It chased flow. And that flow became doctrine. Every aircraft type, from a P-47 to a B-7, was modular, easy to repair, easy to replace, easy to scale. The system was so adaptive that even the Soviets received thousands of U.S. aircraft through Lend-Lease. Fully operational, complete with spare parts and manuals. By 1944, the United States wasn't just an air force. It was an air empire, a civilization whose factories were its airfields, whose workers were its flight crews, and whose currency was movement itself. One engineer put it best: The airplane isn't what we built. The system is. It was the moment industrial design became strategy, and strategy became sky. Numbers don't lie. And in 1944, the numbers were so vast, they stopped sounding real. $2 billion for aircraft production. 96,000 planes built in 1 year. 400,000 engines, 1 billion spark plugs, 3 million propellers. Every number told a story not of money spent, but of time conquered. In 1940, America's aircraft industry produced roughly 3,000 planes, most of them trainers or obsolete designs. 4 years later, it was producing that many every week. Each B-7 Flying Fortress cost $238,000 to build, the equivalent of $4 million today. A B-29 Superfortress with its pressurized cabin and 4 2,200 horsepower engines cost $600,000 each. Yet production lines rolled them out with the precision of an assembly line making toasters. At Boeing's Seattle plant, one bomber emerged every 63 minutes. At North American Aviation's Englewood plant, a P-51 Mustang took shape in just over 24 hours. At Republic Aviation in New York, the P-47 Thunderbolt came off the line so fast that the paint was still drying when the next fuselage arrived. Every 5 minutes, somewhere in the U.S., a new airplane touched daylight for the first time. It wasn't just the factories. The War Production Board had transformed the economy into a synchronized heartbeat. By 1943, 1 out of every 4 American workers was tied to aviation. Engineers, riveters, transport drivers, test pilots, even cafeteria cooks. The air war wasn't fought by a few thousand pilots. It was fought by tens of millions of hands that never left the ground. The scale was insane. In 1944, the U.S. built more aircraft than Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. 96,000 planes, including 18,000 heavy bombers. Planes, including 18,000 heavy bombers. The Luftwaffe managed just 39,000. Each bomber mission cost roughly $35,000 in fuel, ammo, and maintenance. But in a war where each mission could a continent's industry, it was worth every cent. And while Germany's Me-262 jets were engineering marvels, they were built one at a time by hand, often underground in slave factories. Fewer than 1/500 ever flew. In the same period, America produced 15,000 P-51s, mass-produced perfection, that filled the sky with inevitability. The math of war had shifted. The Axis bet on brilliance. The Americans bet on volume. And in industrial warfare, volume is brilliance. Even fuel became arithmetic. The U.S. consumed 300 million gallons of aviation gasoline per month in 1944, enough to fill an Olympic pool every 30 seconds. Germany, strangled by oil shortages, could barely sustain 10% of that. The contrast bordered on tragic. When a German pilot climbed into a jet, he flew on hope. When an American pilot climbed into a Mustang, he flew on systems. By late 1944, the U.S. had reached the impossible threshold. It was building planes faster than it was losing them. Every morning, factories replaced the previous day's losses. The sky refilled before sunset. The $2 billion investment wasn't just financial. It was existential. It turned air superiority into a renewable resource. In the end, those numbers, production rates, tonnage, gallons, hours, were more than statistics. They were the pulse of victory, beating faster every month. The math was brutal and simple. For every aircraft the Axis built, the United States built 5. For every pilot the Axis trained, the U.S. trained 10. War had become economics, and economics had taken flight. June 1944, northern France. Dawn light breaks over endless clouds, and the sky is already alive with sound. Thousands of engines weaving together into a single roar that drowns out thought. From English airfields to the beaches of Normandy, Allied air power moves like a tide. C-47 transports drop paratroopers. I-47 Thunderbolts dive low over hedgerows. their 850 caliber guns stitching death into German columns. Above them, B-17s and B-24s form silver rivers stretching from horizon to horizon. Every 10 minutes, another bomber group takes off. The sky isn't chaos, it's choreography. Each aircraft in the air has a counterpart being fueled, loaded, or repaired somewhere else. Every loss is already accounted for. Every flight hour measured, budgeted, replaced. When one squadron lands, another launches. When a bomber goes down, a new one is en route from Kansas, halfway across the ocean, already paid for, already scheduled. It's not just air superiority, it's industrial continuity. The U.S. Army Air Forces have turned war into a production cycle. A German pilot described it after the war. It was like fighting the ocean. You shoot down one wave and another hits before you reload. He wasn't exaggerating. In June 1944 alone, the Allies flew 27,000 sorties, nearly 15,000 a day. By comparison, the Luftwaffe could barely launch 500. And the difference wasn't courage or technology. It was logistics. Each P-51 Mustang over France was part of a global chain. The engine was cast in Connecticut, the propeller forged in Ohio, the fuselage assembled in California, the pilot trained in Texas. Fuel came from refineries in Louisiana, loaded into ships in New York, and pumped into bladders under runways in England. That one aircraft was the sum of a continent's effort. When its pilot throttled up, he carried an entire civilization into the sky. Back on the ground, airfields functioned like factories. Mechanics worked shifts around the clock, fueling, rearming, patching bullet holes with aluminum tape. The average turnaround time for a fighter was 45 minutes. Bombers, 3 hours. A downed plane could be replaced faster than its pilot could fill out a loss report. The German system couldn't comprehend this tempo. Their planes were handmade, their maintenance ad hoc, their parts non-inchangeable. When a Messerschmitt lost a wing, it stayed grounded. When a Mustang lost a wing, another was waiting on the next cargo ship. By mid-1944, the Allies no longer fought for the sky. They owned it. Not because they built better planes, but because they built enough. The U.S. had weaponized replacement. Every flight was a line item. Every mission a transaction. If a bomber made it home, it was refueled, rearmed, and flying again in 6 hours. If it didn't, its absence was already corrected before the wreck hit the ground. That's how America fought the air war, by hours, not by victories. Every 60 minutes, another wave launched. Every 5 minutes, another plane rolled off a line somewhere back home. The Luftwaffe wasn't defeated in dogfights. It was defeated by the clock. Because in 1944, time itself belonged to the United States. Every hour was paid for in dollars, fuel, and discipline. And by the end of the day, the sky itself was an American factory. By the summer of 1944, Germany and Japan weren't losing because of bravery or tactics. They were losing because the air above them had become math, and they couldn't solve it. The Luftwaffe's brilliance had been built on scarcity. Its early victories in 1939 and 1940 came from elite pilots flying superior aircraft in small numbers. It worked until arithmetic took over. By 1943, German factories couldn't keep up with attrition. Strategic bombing had shredded their fuel refineries, and aluminum production had fallen 70%. The once proud training pipeline collapsed, where new pilots had once logged 400 hours before combat. Now they got barely pointen. Some reached the front, with fewer than a dozen takeoffs in a real fighter. Meanwhile, America's airmen trained on endless fields stretching across Texas, Florida, and California. The U.S. had so many planes that flight schools used them like disposable tools. Some cadets practiced landings until they wrecked the landing gear. And the next morning, a new aircraft waited, fueled and spotless. Germany had no such luxury. The numbers spiraled into despair. Between January and June 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 8,000 aircraft. Production replaced only half. By the time of D-Day, fewer than 200 German fighters could oppose the 12,000 Allied planes in the sky. The Reich's solution was perfection. Jet technology, rocket planes, miracle weapons, the Me-262, the Arido 234, the V-1, the V-2, each revolutionary, each too rare to matter. The United States built by subtraction. Fewer parts, more repetition, faster rhythm. Germany built by addition, more innovation, more complexity, more time. Time is what they ran out of first. Japan's crisis was even crueler. Its Zero fighter had once been a legend, light, fast, unbeatable. But by 1944, Japan had lost the one resource no factory could replace: pilots. They could build airframes, but not experience. Aviation gasoline grew so scarce that flight training relied on wooden mock-ups and bicycle engines. While Japanese instructors pedaled students down runways to simulate takeoff, American pilots were training in squadrons of 50, each with their own aircraft and spare parts. The United States consumed the sky like a natural resource. The Axis rationed it like medicine. Fuel became the currency of despair. A Luftwaffe general wrote, "We have planes without pilots, pilots without fuel, fuel without time." That's collapse math when every number turns into zero. By 1945, Allied bombers attacked Germany in waves 1,000 planes deep. Cities vanished. Factories went silent. The skies were so full of contrails that daylight itself looked scarred. The Luftwaffe shot down 200 Allied aircraft a week but lost 400 of its own. The equation could no longer balance. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, admitted bitterly, "The Americans are not building aircraft. They are building a sky that reproduces itself." He was right. The U.S. system didn't need victory in combat. It needed only continuity. When Japan's surrender came, it wasn't just because of atomic bombs, it was because of arithmetic. A war machine that cannot refuel cannot exist. The Axis had brilliance, courage, and vision, but they couldn't turn genius into geometry. America could. Because in modern war, air superiority isn't a contest of pilots. It's a contest of systems. And when the math ends, so does the sky. Seattle, Washington, 1943. Beneath a roof painted to look like a quiet suburb, complete with fake streets, fences, and trees, an invisible city is at war. Below that camouflage lies Boeing Plant 2, the beating heart of American air power. From the air, it looks peaceful. From inside, it feels like a thunderstorm made of machinery. Over 30,000 workers move through a labyrinth of catwalks and assembly lines, turning sheets of aluminum into bombers so massive that each one fills an entire warehouse bay. The B-17 Flying Fortress, 60,000 parts, 4 Wright Cyclone engines, 10 machine guns. It takes 55 days to assemble, but the plant finishes a new one every hour. The rhythm is astonishing. Workers call it the tide. Raw metal comes in through one end, and every hour the tide carries another B-7 out the opposite door, rolling past sparks, sweat, and shouted orders. Each machine will soon join thousands more over Europe, part of a formation so vast it blots out the sun. Every sound inside the factory echoes that future. The hiss of pneumatic drills, the clatter of rivets hammered in unison, the bass hum of engines on test stands vibrating the floor like artillery. A journalist visiting the plant wrote, "It's like watching the ground manufacture its own storm. Each worker knows their role, but never sees the finished product." A woman named Louise Baldwin spends her 12-hour shifts drilling 6 holes, the same 6, on a single part of the B-7's left wing. She'll never see it fly, but she knows it will. "Everyone builds their own square of sky," one supervisor tells her. "Lunch breaks are short, 7 minutes to eat, drink, and return before the line moves past your station. Missing one shift means a plane doesn't fly that week. Boeing engineers calculate production with military precision. A single 10-minute delay can cost the factory a full aircraft by month's end. To keep morale alive, every completed bomber carries a chalk mark from the crew that built it. Initials, jokes, drawings. One inscription found later on a wrecked B-17 read, "Made in Seattle. Sorry about the delay." Boeing's City of Wings never sleeps. 3 shifts run day and night under blacked-out windows in the hum of exhaustion. By 1945, Plant 2 produces more than 12,000 bombers, 1 in every 6 that the U.S. flies over Europe. None of it would have been possible without the workers who never saw daylight, who lived by the rhythm of rivet guns and the smell of aluminum dust. They didn't wear uniforms, but they fought a war all the same. Their battlefield was measured in man-hour, not miles. And when the bombers rose from England to hammer the Reich, every one of them carried the invisible fingerprints of this hidden city. Seattle never burned, but it roared, because this was where America learned to turn muscle into altitude and ambition into air. Tinian Island, 1945. 6 square miles of coral turned into the largest airfield complex on Earth. From a distance, it looks like a mirage. 3 runways stretching past the horizon, lined with endless silver shapes baking in the tropical sun. Up close, it's a factory without walls. Here, air war has become production. Rows of B-29 Superfortresses, the most expensive aircraft ever built at the time, wait in perfect order. Each one carries more engineering than an entire destroyer. Crews swarm over them in heat so fierce that metal burns the hand. Ground crews move like mechanics on a clock. Every takeoff is timed to the second. In the Pacific, the sky itself is now part of the assembly line. Fuel trucks roll in from one end. Ammunition crews load incendiaries and high explosives from the other. Mechanics refit engines between sorties. Pilots drenched in sweat stand under shade tents being briefed, while their next aircraft is already prepared behind them. When one B-29 leaves the runway, another begins its engine start. Every 3 minutes, a bomber rises. In the control tower, a young officer watches the rhythm unfold. Wings shimmering in the heat, engines howling, the sky filling with motion. He doesn't see a fleet, he sees a system designed to race distance. Each mission from Tinian to Japan lasts 12 hours. 6 there, 6 back. To sustain them, the island functions as a closed-loop machine. 80,000 men, 60 million gallons of fuel, and more than 100,000 tons of bombs moved, loaded and tracked in rotation. Nothing is wasted. Nothing stops. Each sortie cost $44,000 in 1945. Each night, 400 planes launch. That's nearly $18 million of destruction every 24 hours. But Tinian's rhythm isn't about money anymore. It's about momentum. When the planes return, they land on one runway, while the next formation takes off on another. Crews step out of one bomber and into another, sleeping in tents while engines cool and ordnance is restocked. By dawn, the cycle begins again. A single maintenance error can delay the chain. But even then, there's backup. Tinian holds entire spare engines and replacement parts ready for any failure. Nothing grounds the flow. It's manufacturing, not warfare. Every airfield from Saipan to Okinawa mirrors this process. Islands turned into floating factories. Each B-29 is an assembly of 60 subcontractors across 20 states flown halfway across the world, maintained by men who treat their aircraft like living infrastructure. Germany built planes as weapons. America built planes as systems. The U.S. Army Air Forces called this doctrine continuous combat capability, the ability to keep striking indefinitely. When questioned how long the campaign could last, General Curtis LeMay answered flatly, "Until there's nothing left to bomb." He wasn't exaggerating. In 6 months, the 20th Air Force dropped 160,000 tons of explosives on Japan, more than the entire tonnage dropped by all nations in World War I. Each raid began at dusk with the same precision as a production shift. At Tinian, soldiers joked that they worked in the Sky Factory because that's what it was, a living, flying assembly line where materials became motion, and motion became annihilation. This wasn't chaos. It was design. The $2 billion spent on aircraft had become something beyond strategy. It was a tempo, a new kind of warfare where logistics and altitude were one. On Tinian, war wasn't fought. It was manufactured. By 1945, the United States had spent over $2 billion on aircraft production, more money than any nation in history had ever spent on a single category of weapon. Yet, the miracle wasn't what that money bought, but what it created. The U.S. didn't just build planes. It built an ecosystem of flight. Factories in California and Ohio were connected to refineries in Texas, rail lines in Kansas, and airfields in England and Guam. Each plane was the visible tip of an invisible continent-wide machine. The B-7 wasn't just a bomber. It was a symbol of the new logic of war, a logic where scale replaced brilliance and reliability replaced innovation. The Germans had the Me-262, the world's first jet fighter. Faster, deadlier, unmatched. But it arrived too late, too few. With no fuel to fly and no pilots left to fly it, America's $2 billion fleet had already rewritten the rules. Money didn't buy the sky. Systems did. Every dollar spent on aluminum, fuel, training, and spare parts bought not individual planes, but time. The most valuable currency in war. Because air superiority isn't an achievement. It's a condition, one that must be maintained, replenished, and replaced faster than it decays. That was the genius of the U.S. system. It made flight renewable. Factories produced faster than the front could consume. Fuel tankers sailed faster than planes could burn what they carried. Replacement crews graduated faster than losses occurred. Victory wasn't a battle. It was a rate. At $2 billion, the United States didn't just purchase domination. It purchased continuity. The Luftwaffe ran out of planes. Japan ran out of pilots. America never ran out of flow. It was the first time in history that a nation had achieved permanent air presence, a sky so thick with motion that the enemy could no longer imagine daylight. The cost was staggering. Over 88,000 American airmen never returned. Factories consumed more electricity than entire cities. Aluminum shortages crippled civilian industries for a decade. But the trade was clear. Supremacy bought in volume. And from that industrial furnace, a new doctrine emerged. Whoever controls production controls altitude. By 1945, air power had evolved from a tactic to a foundation, the new pillar of modern civilization. The war's end proved it. When Japan surrendered, it did so not under artillery or invasion, but under wings. Cities burned not because of armies, but because of the system that could fill the sky until the sun vanished. The sky had been bought, paid for, and manufactured. And the invoice read, $2 billion, the greatest return on investment in human history. When the guns went silent in 1945, the war left behind more than ruins and treaties. It left behind an infrastructure, a living, breathing system of production and power that would never again go dormant. The same $2 billion that once forged bombers now forged the modern world. Boeing, Lockheed, and Douglas shifted from machines of war to vessels of ambition. The assembly lines that had produced B-17s began turning out Stratoliners, Constellations, and, in time, jetliners. The sky America had once conquered became a marketplace for travel, for communication, for possibility. That was the unseen inheritance of the air war. The greatest aviation program in history didn't conclude with victory. It transformed. The conflict that had taught the world to destroy from above also taught it how to connect. Civil aviation, global shipping, meteorology, satellite engineering all grew from that $2 billion foundation of wartime flight. Every rivet driven into a B-29 became part of the DNA of the modern era. The laborers who once built bombers for Europe now assembled cargo planes for peace. Runways that had launched destruction now launched prosperity. Airfields from Tinian to Texas formed the skeleton of a new global economy. Integrated, mobile, interlinked. The lesson was deep and enduring. Industrial scale could outlast devastation. The Axis believed strength came from perfection. Perfect designs, perfect weapons, perfect men. The United States proved that real power came from motion, from flow, speed, repetition, and reliability. That principle would define everything that followed. From the Cold War's jet age to the digital revolutions that shaped the 21st century, the same logic that built the P-51 and the B-29 would one day build the microchip and the Internet. Decentralization, iteration, mass production, and continuous flow. The arsenal of democracy hadn't merely won a war, it had written the blueprint for modern civilization. What began as $2 billion of wartime investment became the architecture for how humanity would move forever. Because air superiority was never just about altitude. It was about systems that endure, about a nation able to turn imagination into industry and industry into dominance. The sky America purchased in 1944 was more than a battlefield. It was a beginning. They spent $2 billion to command the air and ended up shaping the future.